I have a long list of acknowledgments, and every single one deserves a standing ovation, but if you can hold your claps until the end, we'd be grateful, because we have a lot of support from elected officials here today, and I'm personally thankful to everyone. First, not an elected official, but our host, Gregory Morris, Executive Director of the Isaac Center, Congressman Adriano Espaillat, Congressman Jerry Nadler, New York City Public Advocate Tish James, New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer, New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, Assembly Member Michael Blake, Assembly Member Felice Ortiz, Assembly Member Latrice Walker, Assembly Member David Weprin, Assembly Member Alika Sampre Samuel, Council Member Robert Cornegi, City Council Member, and special in my heart, Richie Torres, Danny Barbara, my client and friend, the president of the New York City Council of Citywide Council of Presidents, all of the community leaders and advocates here, and I have to especially thank District Chair for Manhattan North, Ethel Battle Velez, who's really been a champion. But we also would not be here without members of Governor Cuomo's amazing executive staff who have worked tirelessly. Alfonso David, counsel to the governor, Fran Barrett, interagency coordinator for nonprofit organizations, Ruth Ann Visnauskas, commissioner for the New York City Homes and Community Renewal, Dr. Howard Zucker, commissioner for the New York City Department of Health. Let's give them all. Today is a proud day for the NYCHA community. They made their voices heard, and today they see the results. For a long time, for far too long, no one listened. We've been brought here because tenants' civil rights have been violated, their health has been jeopardized, and their calls for action have been ignored by city officials for years, and most acutely recently. Let us replay what the NYCHA community asked of the city administration and what Governor Cuomo answered when he stepped in to help us. First and most importantly, we asked for something simple. We asked for visits, and Governor Cuomo came not once, not twice, but 3 times to help shine the disinfecting light of the media glare on the terrible conditions that NYCHA tenants live with day in and day out. We asked for an emergency declaration to take some of the most critical repairs out of NYCHA's hand. We asked for design-build authority. NYCHA was going to take 3 years to make these repairs, but with design-build, we knew that it could be done faster and better. We asked the governor for something that was totally unfair. And honestly, we felt slightly guilty about it because it's the city and the federal government that should be funding these repairs, but we asked Governor Cuomo's team to give us more money. And we wanted to make sure that that money was overseen by an emergency manager that would make sure that the money was well spent, because we know that for every dollar that NYCHA spends, it wastes $3. We asked him for the tenants, for the first time, to have a role in their fate by having a role over the selection of the emergency manager to make sure the money was well spent. And we asked him for another thing that had been long denied to the NYCHA community, which is jobs. The federal law requires that 30% of jobs be given to NYCHA tenants, and that's what we asked as a part of the money that we asked to be allocated for the greatest emergency repairs. So I will leave it to others to tell you which of those things we got, but I will say this. Other elected officials should learn from the example of true leadership that Governor Cuomo has brought to this issue. This, especially in this day and age of cynical cronyism, this is the kind of leadership that especially impoverished people in the city and across the nation deserve. He is someone who listens to people, keeps his promises, and fixes the problem rather than simply engaging in political finger-pointing. So, Governor Cuomo, I say once again, thank you for being an amazing force for good, and let me now introduce my friend and my client, Danny Barber, the head of CCOP.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. First and foremost, let's give an honor to God. Because without him, this day wouldn't be possible. So we thank him. I thank the Citywide Council of Presidents. I thank the residents of public housing. And I thank some friends, our attorneys, at-risk communities, who we couldn't have done it without them, Jim Walden, Julia Pachetti and the team. I thank you guys all personally from the bottom of my heart, because working with you guys, you're the best. You rock. And I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I thank the elected officials, Tish James, Lika Ampry-Samuels, Mr. Connery, Richie Torres, and the slew of all the rest of you who stepped up to the plate to support us, and my new friend, Speaker Corey Johnson. He's not last, nor is he least. He's my new buddy. He calls me Big Boy. And I want to say personally to the governor, thank you. Thank you for being a man of the word. Thank you for assisting the residents of public housing when it really counted and we needed the help. I say thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I really have to give one more special thanks. And it's a member of the governor's team, Health Commissioner Zucker. I thank you, sir. I look forward to working with you. I look forward to continuing to make the conditions of public housing better, to be called home and suitable for a human being to call it their place to live with their family. So without further ado, my new best friend, Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's hear it for President Danny Barber. Oh, let's hear it louder for President Danny Barber than that. Thank you. First, to all the elected officials, to the CCOP, to the president, to Jim Walden, who did a great, great job. Let's give Jim Walden a great job. Jim Walden's right. I came 3 times. Not that I needed to come 3 times to see what was going on, but he's exactly right. I came 3 times because I wanted to bring these people, you see? All these cameras, all these lenses. Because I wanted the people of New York City to see what was going on in public housing. Because I know the people of New York City. I'm a New York City boy, born and raised. That's where this Queens accent comes from. And I knew if they saw the conditions that were going on, and they saw how their fellow brothers and sisters were living, they would have absolutely no tolerance for it. Not in this city. Not the way we feel about each other. Not what we believe. They would have no tolerance. It reminded me of after the hurricane in Puerto Rico, the last hurricane. And Puerto Rico was getting no help. And we went down on the first flight because we wanted to expose the conditions that the people in Puerto Rico were living in. And when New Yorkers saw what was going on in Puerto Rico, it was unbelievable, the outpouring of donations and success and feeling. Well, the same thing happened here. I can't tell you how many people have stopped me and said, I saw you on TV. I can't believe the conditions in public housing. And they said, well, did you just happen to pick that? Did they do that before you got there? Did they make it look bad? I said, no. That is the way it is. And they said it's unbelievable. And we have to do something about it. We're celebrating the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King. And Dr. King used to talk about discrimination and the different forms of discrimination. That there is a blunt, obvious, obnoxious type of discrimination. You can't eat here, you can't drink from this water fountain. But then there's also a subtle form of discrimination that is more insidious, but less obvious. And that's what this is to me. Do you think for 1 minute, if the wealthy and the powerful were living in public housing, that they would take the answer, it's going to take 3 years to turn on the heat? Do you think that would be tolerated? We had a snowstorm up in Westchester, the Hudson Valley, a couple of weeks ago. People were without power for a matter of days. They wanted to hang me for being without power for a matter of days. Can you imagine if they had been told, well, it's going to be 3 years before I can turn on the heat? You're going to live with mold and mildew and vermin. There's lead paint in your apartment, and we're not really sure if it's there or if it's not or if it's been abated. And by the way, lead paint is a poison. It is a poison. It is irreversible damage to children, and it is a poison. And it's something we dealt with 30 years ago. But it's still there today. Now, public housing was given, the vision, the idea was that this was going to be a beautiful thing for the country. This was going to be safe, clean, decent housing. That's what the 1949 Housing Act said. Safe, clean, decent housing. You go toward these NYCHA facilities and you tell me it's safe, clean, decent housing. It's an embarrassment to the people of this city and the people of this country, and all we had to do was expose it. Now, NYCHA saying we're going to do it in 3 years, that is too little and that is too late. And it's that simple. And what Danny Barber and what the CCOP said was, we need an emergency order to bring in an emergency manager who can cut through all that NYCHA red tape, who can get something done. We need what's called design build authority, which means you can accelerate the construction. You start to design it and then you start to build it at the same time so you get it done in much less time. They said, we want a seat at the table because these are our lives and our children, and we don't need anyone else telling us how to live our lives. And they said, we need more money. And the federal government hasn't given us enough money, and the city hasn't given us enough money, and we want the state to chip in and help. Now, the state has 150 public housing authorities. Every city has its own housing authority. State has never contributed significant money to a housing authority because it's between the city and the federal government. But this is different. We sent our health commissioner, Commissioner Zucker, and he came back and he reported to me that this is a health emergency, that we have people living in conditions that we should not allow people to live in, and that it's the state's responsibility, if nobody else is going to step up, that we should step up to the plate, and we are going to commit a total of $550 million to making a difference. Now, also, it's very important that that money not get caught up in any bureaucracy. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to do everything that the tenants asked us to do. I'm signing an executive order today that says there is an emergency, and in a state-declared emergency, it gives me the power to waive rules and regulations. And we're going to sign an emergency order that says, number one, we have to appoint an emergency manager, and there'll be 3 parties who appoint the emergency manager: the mayor, the city council head, and Danny Barber as the head of the CCOP. And that it has to be unanimous. We say they have to do it fast. They have to get it done in 60 days. I would have said you had to get it done in less, Danny, if it was up to me. They have to get it done in 60 days. Once they pick an emergency manager, then they pick an independent contractor, and that has to be done in 30 days. That independent contractor has design build authority and is not going to be subject to the rules and regulations of NYCHA in making any procurement. As soon as that independent contractor is selected, the state will release all $550 million that remains to that independent contractor to do the work on day one. And that money is going to make a difference. Now, we passed this just a couple of days ago. What happens in the interim? The Department of Housing and Urban Development comes in and says they're going to take over the approval of the expenditure of the HUD funds, the NYCHA funds. Now, I was the HUD secretary. I was HUD secretary under Bill Clinton. You remember Bill Clinton? I've been through housing authorities all across this country. What I have seen at NYCHA is as bad as anything I have seen anywhere. The last thing we need is HUD to now come in and say they're going to add another level of bureaucracy to spending of the NYCHA funds. That is the last thing we need. We have a mechanism in place. It's fast. It's going to work. It's independent. The tenants are involved. They're going to make the selection. The controller is going to work with them. The city council is involved. We don't need a federal government official coming in here and adding another level to how the NYCHA money is going to be spent. Part of the problem here is that the federal government has starved NYCHA of the funds they need to make a difference. They are part of the problem. They are not part of the solution. And I don't believe, with all due respect to President Trump, that he's going to put public housing up at the top of his agenda. I do not believe that. So we don't need President Trump sending in his Department of Housing to control the NYCHA funds. Thank you very much, but we can handle it ourselves. Now, I want to applaud all the people who made today possible. I want to applaud the City Council and the new Speaker, Corey Johnson, who stepped up and showed leadership. Give him a round of applause. I want to thank Richie Torres and Robert Cornegie, who stood up and told the truth and exposed the problem. Richie Torres did those hearings. He called NYCHA in. It was clear that NYCHA didn't know what they were talking about, whether there was lead paint or there wasn't lead paint, or the people were trained or they weren't trained. And that exposure is what brought us to today. I want to thank Alika Ampry-Samuel for her leadership of the committee to now. I want to thank Controller Scott Stringer, who's going to stand up and be part of this process, because he wants to make sure it happens, and it happens fast. And I know the controller a long time. When he decides it's going to happen, it happens. Stand up so people can give you a round of applause. I want to thank Tish James, public advocate. She is a public advocate in the truest sense of the word. Congressman Jerry Nadler and Congressman Espaillat, who was on this issue from the beginning and pushed us to get it done fast. And let me say this before I thank the last person. Government, at the end of the day, is very simple. We tend to make it complicated, and it's all these different levels, and it's people pointing fingers at this one or that one. It's all this level of politics. That's all baloney. The job of government is to help people. The job of government is to get things done for people. Not to issue press releases saying, I propose doing this. Not to get up and do press conferences and says what I think should be done. Get something done. You know people are living in terrible conditions. Get it done. No excuses, no pointing fingers. Make it happen and get it done. That's what it's about. You believe in government, then act like you believe in government. And don't take no for an excuse, and don't tell me you have an obstacle and there's a problem. You figure out a way to get around it. And that is exactly what we did. People stood up. Reverend Johnny Green, stand up, Reverend Green. And he said, I'm not taking no for an answer. But the people who led the parade were the tenants who empowered themselves to stand up and say, I'm not taking it anymore. We're going to organize, and our voice is going to be heard, and they're going to hear us in City Hall, and they're going to hear us in Congress, and they're going to hear us in Albany, and we're not going to stop fighting until we get what we want, which is decent, safe, clean, decent housing, and safety for our children, and better health for our children. And that's exactly what you got today, and I applaud you for your courage in making today happen. Thank you, and God bless you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Let's give another round of applause to Governor Cuomo for this leadership. He is making it work for tenants throughout our city, not just in El Barrio, but throughout our city. And today, the governor isn't just announcing throwing money at something. His executive order directs an independent monitor to address health and safety issues related to NYCHA and develop an abatement and remediation plan. And I want you to know that the Comptroller's Office stands ready to work with the City Council and Corey Johnson, our partners in government, and we believe the new monitor will ensure rules and regulations are followed. 4 years ago, when we came into the Comptroller's Office, NYCHA was at the top of our audit list. It was priority number one. And now, years later, we have audited NYCHA 9 times. That's more than all the controllers combined in modern history. The findings highlight why we need an independent monitor. Our audits help tell the story of how we got to this point. In 2014, we found that broken and missing windows in NYCHA buildings increased by 945% over just a 6-year period. Later in 2014, we discovered that NYCHA had missed out on at least $692 million in revenue, federal support, and cost savings that could have supported improvements to its infrastructure. Money was left on the table. And then in July 2015, we uncovered that NYCHA was underreporting its maintenance backlog, which reached 55,000 repairs. We showed in another audit that it takes an average of 370 days, more than a year, to fix safety violations mandated by the Fire Department, Department of Building, and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. We showed how moldy apartments are improperly fixed by untrained personnel. And we uncovered how most emergency repairs, gas leaks, major flooding, heating outages go unaddressed for 24 hours or more. So the audits we've done have shown the light, but the light doesn't make change. It only highlights the problem. And that's why I'm here today with Governor Cuomo, because he has basically put the marker down. No longer are these issues going to get passed along to administration after administration. Now we have an independent monitor that's going to make independent decisions and work to move the bureaucracy. Give him another thank you, because this is what it's all about. The governor mentioned the great story of public housing. But the truth is, back in 1938, when LaGuardia built public housing, it was not housing for poor people. For $100 a month, you could rent a NYCHA apartment, and you had a ticket to the middle class. We kids growing up in Washington Heights, the governor grew up in Queens, I'm from Uptown, we used to hang out at Dyckman houses. We lived a few blocks away. There was no difference between NYCHA tenants and residents and where we lived. But today, it's not a tale of two cities anymore. It's a tale of two street corners. In Ingersoll houses in the Bronx, you see the lack of investment, but across the street, you see luxury skylines. It's not fair. It's not right. And I just wanted to say to you, Governor, and to everyone involved, that we now have an opportunity to make this difference. And I promise all of you, I will be in that room holding people accountable. Thank you very much.
So before I, of course, thank the governor and Danny, I want to acknowledge some of the good members of the city council here today. Robert Cornegie, the chair of our Housing and Buildings Committee. Richie Torres, who is the chair of our Oversight and Investigations Committee and formerly chaired our Public Housing Committee and grew up in public housing here in New York City. And our new fabulous chair of the Public Housing Committee, who grew up in Marcus Garvey houses, Alika Ampry Samuel, as I like to say it. It is a united team on the council and wanting to get results for NYCHA residents. Now, I grew up in public housing, not in New York City and Massachusetts. And in the town that I grew up in, there were 12 units of public housing. And public housing there was much different than public housing here. Public housing there was well-funded. Public housing there, the heat didn't go off. Public housing there, the grounds were clean. Public housing there was not endemic, everyday issues and problems with the landlord, which was the town that I grew up in. And that is what every public housing resident deserves. Every public housing resident deserves to live in habitable housing that provide them with respect and dignity every day, 365 days a year in New York City. And that is what today is about. Today is about Governor Cuomo's leadership, and I also want to thank, I see some members of the State Assembly here, and Speaker Carl Heastie's leadership in prioritizing $250 million in the budget. I see David Weprin and Latrice Walker, who are here from the State Assembly, and I want to thank them for partnering with the governor in achieving this money. Now, I'm not going to, yes, they deserve credit. I am not going to detail every issue that we've heard about, but I will say this. I am grateful and glad that Governor Cuomo has put a process in place to get NYCHA $550 million on top of what we saw in a preliminary budget from the city, $200 million in this upcoming budget, and we in the council will push for more money for NYCHA on top of that $200 million. And we, of course, know about years and decades of disinvestment from the federal government. But I think this year we have to stop saying that, because we saw, it was like the Twilight Zone, we saw last week or 2 weeks ago, we saw an increase in the federal budget as it related to capital funds and operating funds for public housing authorities around the country. So with the state's $550 million, with the city's $200 million to start, that's $750 million. And with, I think, over $100 million from the federal government, that is $850 million. We need to get the money out the door. The money needs to get spent as quickly as possible. This city council, in my first major hearing as speaker, led by Alika Epri-Salmon and Richie Torres, we had a 6-hour oversight hearing on NYCHA related to endemic heat and hot water issues. And when we called that hearing, we asked how many people were without heat or hot water in NYCHA. And the rough number that was given to us going into the hearing was 40 to 50,000 people. And through that hearing, through our oversight capability, we were able to uncover that 323,000 NYCHA residents out of 400,000 people who live in NYCHA, from October 1st until the beginning of February, 323,000 NYCHA residents were without heat and hot water. So the design-build capability to shorten the time on procurement, the emergency order waiving further procurement rules, the $550 million from the state, $200 million from the city, $100 million from the feds, almost $1 billion in new funds. That is going to go a long way towards us getting these repairs done as quickly as possible. And so I look forward to coming back here less than a year from now to announce which NYCHA developments have gotten the upgrades that they deserve and that they need. This city council will continue to do robust, meaningful oversight over the Public Housing Authority, because NYCHA tenants and residents deserve that from all levels of government. So I am grateful for Governor Cuomo. I'm grateful for Speaker Hasty and the members of the Assembly. I'm grateful from all of our partners in government for stepping up for public housing residents. And I look forward to us working collectively as a team to get results as quickly as possible. Thank you all very much. And I want to call up our Madam Public Advocate, Letitia James.
Amen. So you notice that all of the men who stepped to the podium today, Mr. Walden, the governor, the speaker, the controller, none of them had ties. So today is Tieless Monday, and that's good because we're removing all of the bureaucracy, we're removing all of the obstacles, and we're responding to the needs of residents. And everyone has been referring to them as residents. To me, they're family. Yeah. Miss Washington, Miss Cruz, Miss Johnson. I've been to their homes. I've had dinner in their homes. I've watched their babies. I've held them in their arms. I've been visiting their homes for years, not just since I was an elected official, because to me, this is personal. These are people that I visit. These are people who I pray with. And these are people who I fight for. So I want to thank the governor today. But I want to thank all of my elected officials. I want to thank Reverend Johnny Green. I want to thank the Honorable Danny Barbary. Now you're Honorable, Danny. I want to thank the Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. I want to thank Congressmember Nadler, Congressmember Espiat. I want to thank my little sister, Councilmember Alika Ampry-Samuel, and Councilmember Torres, and Councilmember Cornegie, and my other big sister, Latrice Walker, and Assemblymember Weprin, and Assemblymember Felix Ortiz. And let me just say, since I do come from a faraway place called Brooklyn, I know that in Brownsville there are 3 elected officials, Alika Samuels, Latrice Walker, and Jesse Hamilton. They all lived in public housing. So good things come out of public housing, and all three of them are lawyers. So this notion that nothing good comes out of public housing is false. All you've got to look at is my friends. And so I want to thank the governor for bringing us here today. And I remember meeting Ben Carson. I remember getting his book, The Gifted Hands, autographed. But Governor, you've got the gifted hands. And so we thank you today. This is how the other half lives. Those are not my words. Those are the words of Jacob Reese. When immigrants who are living in deplorable conditions in the Lower East Side said that we need to build public housing. The immigrants look different from the ones that today who are living in public housing. But nonetheless, they were living in deplorable conditions. And then Mayor Fiorella LaGuardia and then FDR said, we need to build public housing for these immigrants because they cannot live in these conditions. We've got to respond. Back then, it was called cooperative politics, cooperative government. And so we are so glad that Governor Cuomo has recognized that responsibility in the role of government. And although he talked about 250, it's actually 550 million, and then with the city council, it's going to raise it to 750, but I'm challenging them to get it to $1 billion, right? It's so interesting that time has a funny way of repeating itself. You see, these individuals live with leaking roofs and dangerous mold and toxic lead, and we hope that they will have to not live through another winter of hell, and that these children are not kept up all night because of below freezing temperatures, or our seniors getting sick without heat, or seniors who have to go to sleep in their coats and in their socks. There's something wrong with that, something immoral about that. And because we all know that the funds are only half the battle, we need to make sure that this money is going where it is needed, and that these repairs happen now, and not 5 years from now, but now, the fierce urgency of now. And that is why the emergency monitor that Governor Cuomo is implementing is critically important. But let us be clear, this is not a panacea for all of our problems that have been plaguing NYCHA. And Mr. Walden will remind you that the litigation will continue. And so this is an important step to make emergency repairs to some of the worst problems, but it will not address everything. So we must make sure that we continue to shine a light on the problems of NYCHA. And in 2 days, as we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King, who at the time of his murder, time of his death, was talking about the war on poverty, was talking about the conditions that people live in, let us be reminded that the struggle continues. Our families here deserve the same and decent housing that everyone else in the city deserves, and we must not forget. And so, it's now my honor and my privilege to call to you once again to the podium the man, the leader of our state, who stood up and has responded to the countless needs of individuals suffering. Ladies and gentlemen, stand on your feet for the governor of the state of New York, Governor Cuomo, as he signs the executive order.
Thank you. Come over here, we're going to sign.